When I saw the headline, my first reaction was, oh, Lord, not again. Hey, everybody, I'm Steve Green with Bill Whittle and Scott Ott, and this is Right Angle, brought to you by the members of BillWhittle.com. And in Fort Worth, Texas, another police officer, Aaron Dean, arrested for murder, charged for murder, out on $200,000 bail after killing an unarmed civilian, Atatiana Jefferson, age 28, in her own home while she was babysitting her 8-year-old nephew and playing some video games in the middle of the night. Okay, so, gentlemen, what happened was her neighbor, let me make sure I've got his name correctly. James Smith noticed that her front door was ajar. Apparently, she had a couple of doors open, maybe looking for a nice breeze to come through on a warm night. Called the police for a wellness check. He didn't dial 911, nothing emergency. He just wanted somebody to stop by and make sure that everything was okay because the door was ajar. The police showed up, a whole squad of police apparently, parked around the corner where Tatiana could not see them from her house. They swarmed the building. They're checking the perimeter with flashlights, not announcing themselves, not knocking on the door. Former officer Aaron Dean, he resigned on Monday before the force could fire him. He was at the back of the house, appears to see a figure through a dark window. This is according to his body cam footage. And he quickly twists his body to the left. He shouts, "Put your hands up. Show me your hands." Again, not identifying himself as a police officer. And you can barely hear somebody shouting through the thick glass of a house window. And he shoots her through the window almost immediately. She died on the scene as police tried to resuscitate her. And he, of course, has been charged with murder in this instance. Scott, we got a real problem here, don't we?
I suppose it's vain to hearken to a time when having your front door open in summer meant that it was summer. It meant that that's what everybody did at a time when, I would say 95% of the time in my growing up, our front door was never locked. Our car doors were never locked. And frequently our doors were opened, like you said, to let the breeze flow through. The other thing that is futile, I think, to mention is the fact that we knew our neighbors when I was a kid. Edna Weaver across the street, the Sirwatkas in the house next to her. And I could go down that street and name every resident of every household. It's not that we hung out with each other all the time, but we knew our neighbors. And if we needed to get in touch with somebody, we could easily do that. Now we live in a society apparently where we don't know our neighbors well enough to go over and make sure everything's okay if the door's open. And I'm not blaming Mr. Smith for this. And then when we call the police don't get a call that says, in fact, he didn't even call the police. He called just for a wellness check, basically for the social welfare people to come and check on her. But instead, police show up, not to a hostage situation, not to a report of a gun scene, not to a report of some sort of a sniper, but just somebody's door being ajar. They show up in force. They're on edge, knowing that domestic situations, and here's another problem that I need not mention, that in our time, that domestic situations result in more police injuries and deaths, probably than any other kind of crime into which they find themselves, crime scenes they find themselves in. And so at every step of the way, we see the decay of society during the last at least 40 years to the point where it was almost inevitable that this were to happen. And it's not that to release the officer from culpability, but it's like one wrong societal move after another leads to a situation where an armed police officer pointing a gun toward the house of a non-combatant, non-criminal, non-accused person somehow manages to squeeze off a round and kill that person. And I think it calls for a reevaluation, not just of how police respond to crime scenes, but how neighborhoods are these days and how we can function together as a community. I mean, even though I do not know my neighbors around here, I've lived here for 2 or 3 months and I don't know the neighbors. I think the guy next door's name is Oscar, but that's the best I can do. If I saw a door open and I thought there was a problem, I'd walk over and say, "Hey, is everything okay?" It would never occur to me to call the police, but now I have a camera at my door and elsewhere on the property, and I get an alert if anybody approaches my house. And we live in a different country than I grew up in, and I'm sad about that. I'm sad about what happened to this officer's career, and most of all, I'm sad for Atatiana Jefferson and her nephew and her mom and anybody else in that family, her whole community, who are suffering as a result of this calamity of societal errors?
Bill, I know all three of us believe that thin blue line is what separates civilization from savagery. And it doesn't take a whole lot of bad cops to make the rest of them look bad and cause us to lose faith in that thin blue line. How do we get that back?
Well, one way you get it back is by prosecuting this guy.
Yeah.
I think my record and our record on support for the police is pretty much well established at this point. Certainly during the Ferguson riots, I was 100% on the case saying that this police officer deserves the benefit of the doubt. And that was before the details of the struggle came out. And in any situation that appears like it might be life-threatening, I am automatically going to give the police the benefit of the doubt. I don't care whether the civilian is black or white. I don't care if the cop is black or white. It is a dangerous, high-risk job, and it is absolute folly and disgrace to sit after the fact and pontificate about what somebody should have done in a life-threatening situation. That said, there's nothing about this story, as reported anyway, that even remotely sounds like it was a life-threatening situation. This police officer should not have been on the police force, and he should be held accountable for his decision. Now, what Scott said is very, very important, and he's absolutely right. A lot of this is due to societal pressures. You can't imagine Andy Taylor, Sheriff Taylor from Mayberry, walking up to a door and then suddenly going around the side of the house, pulling his gun and shooting somebody through the window because they didn't put their hands up fast enough. And of course, the obvious response to that is, yeah, but this wasn't Mayberry. This wasn't Mayberry where this policeman went. But we have to get ourselves down to brass tacks on two things. First of all, we have to get some sense of perspective. When you talk about perspective, sometimes it makes you sound like you're callous. You don't care about the individual or the tragedy. It's not the case at all. But we have 330 million people in this country, many of them heavily armed. And the fact that this is a news story is an indication of the fact that the thousands and thousands and thousands of times a day that policemen all over this country go out on calls that, as Scott pointed out, are their greatest single risk of personal injury or death, and nothing happens, is an indication that the system is not as broken as this kind of thing would lead you to believe. So let's just keep a little perspective here. This is kind of like the 40,000 airplane commercial flights that land safely every day without making the news. So that has to be said to put this into some kind of perspective. But I think the final thing is this. Scott's analysis is absolutely right. This is a breakdown in society. The neighborhoods as we used to understand them don't exist. The level of violent crime and drug abuse and all of this stuff are pathologies that exist, and they are very, very big and exceedingly difficult to repair, let alone repair. But I think ultimately it comes down to this. The reason that I support policemen as strongly as I do is because it is an exceedingly difficult job. And of all of the things that job requires, the thing it requires most is nerve. It requires nerve, discipline, control, and the ability to make decisions on your feet. And to simplify things, I think what I'm trying to say here is, if you decide to become a police officer and you think that when you see an open door that's ajar, your first course of action is to draw your gun and essentially kick the door in, I think you're in the wrong line of work. I fully understand the danger to these police officers. I fully understand it. But it is a special job that is accorded special respect from the people that know and understand what police work is. And the reciprocal of that is that those people have to be made out of the right stuff. And we're doing this episode not because we have a problem with cops. We're doing this episode for the exact opposite reason. It's because bad individuals can tarnish an entire police force and given the political climate, tarnish the entire country, tarnish the entire whole race thing. And so justice has to be done in this case. And justice means prosecuting this man who went far beyond the boundaries of any possible explanation for the fact that we give him the use of lethal force. And if we're going to be a society of law, we need to understand that the human heart is not perfect. People make mistakes. These things happen, but the system is what matters. And if the system is morally sound, then the system will bring justice to this case. And I certainly hope that's the case, despite the fact that it's a tragedy for everybody involved.
Indeed. My last confrontation, to use the word ironically, with a police officer was our neighbor at the bottom of the cul-de-sac as a highway patrol officer, and our post office box. We've got the big collection of mailboxes at the end of the streets that serves both cul-de-sacs. Mm-hmm. Well, the post office left a package for my wife just sitting in the open on top of the big collection of mailboxes instead of bringing it to the house. And our neighbor, the police officer, he saw this. He saw Melissa's name on it. He brought it to us. We were just almost thrilled that neighbors can be so nice in this day and age. And I think that's what most people's confrontations with the police are like, and I would certainly hope so. That said, my heart, of course, goes out to Atatiana Jefferson and her family, and especially her 8-year-old nephew. I can't even imagine what being a witness to that kind of thing must do to an 8-year-old, and I hope he's okay. But as I thought more about this story, my heart really goes out, to James Smith, the neighbor who called this in and set in motion this tragedy, this murder. I hope he doesn't blame himself. If he does, I hope he can forgive himself, because there's nothing to forgive. You didn't do this, sir. That was a police officer who's facing justice now, and I hope his justice comes swiftly. And that is your right angle on that. I'm Steve Green with Bill Whittle and Scott Ott. If you like content like this, please become a member at BillWhittle.com. You can be one of our sponsors, one of our very, very proud sponsors. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.